Welcome, everyone. We are back with another episode of the Purple Bloom Podcast. It is me, Alisha, and
Lauren.
And we are here for episode 6.
Let's get it.
And we are going to talk a little bit about teaching, which is what I do, and also Lauren and her jobs and what she has been doing recently. So we shall get started.
Let's go. So since this is the teaching episode, we wanted to talk, since both of us, Alicia's like a certified teacher, and then I teach music on the side.
Yes.
We wanted to kind of talk about our experiences teaching, and especially Alisha being in the schools, whereas I do private lessons, like teaching private lesson, like music lessons. So for violin, piano, and ukulele. But Alicia's like in the schools actually teaching, and she helps with like teaching English and like reading interventions, the whole works of it, and how that's kind of changed. I guess like how teaching looks now with the pandemic. Yeah. So do you want to talk about like your experience kind of teaching as a teacher like during a global pandemic?
Yeah, it's funny because I started my student teaching before the pandemic happened in late 2019. And so that was a very normal classroom that I had seen before and had been in as a student. You know, we're working in groups, we're interacting with everyone, we're doing projects, like there's no COVID concern, there's no masks. And then there was like a very limited usage of technology. So technology was for a purpose, like a specific purpose. And now that like, that was my student teaching experience. So it wasn't like I had to lesson plan for any of that, just select lessons. But now that I went into reading intervention, it was totally different because now there are no like groups. So there's, you know, no small groups in the classroom. Everyone's in their little taped off box. Like so far as like we can't even like bring food that's not prepackaged in. So like, you know, normally you'd have like a little pizza party at the end of a semester, and like we can't do that now because of COVID. So I think the atmosphere is like really different, and working with what I do with reading intervention, I work with kindergarten, first, second, and fifth. And that is small group work. So I don't have a whole class of students. It's really just a small group of students that we go through stories with. We go through some questions. And then what I do is I always try and find an activity where they can either cut and glue, color, write, draw. We play games. So it's always in some way tactile and interactive, because a lot of my kids are on devices like all day long. So, and that's just, you know, the pandemic. That's how it's changed the way that we teach. And America was very much not ready for us to transition into this like virtual only type of environment. And I've been fortunate enough to have kids that are here and like in person, and I can literally go to their classrooms and get them. But I can't even imagine what the struggle is like if you've got kids in person and then kids online, and then you've got to sort of figure out how to plan for both of those. And so it really limits what you can do. You can't cut and paste with your kids online. You don't know if they have printers at home, you know? So I really hate that this is kind of what we've come to in education. I think it could have been avoided. And at the same time, I'm really thankful we've gotten here, because I think it will make a lot of people reflect on how they've been teaching and try and figure out how to do it better. Because truthfully, we don't really know a whole bunch about how people learn. And I think the pandemic really taught us that. So, but now you are in the same kind of situation where you have kids that are in person and kids that are virtual. So like, how is it different teaching those two different styles?
Like with music and stuff? Oh, girl, it's like night and day with some kids. See, the younger kids who have parents with them on the Zoom call, and the parents are like helping them, like kind of like what I would be doing in person, basically. Like helping them, like, okay, no, that's not an F note on the piano. This is the F note. Just like physically moving them, and then the kid sees like, oh, okay, so this is what my hand does when I press on the, G note or whatever it is. And those kids, we have very effective lessons, I think, because the parent kind of steps in and does that kind of like middleman work. But there's some kids that I have that don't have that parental supervision there in the video. And we cannot get as much done. Like, it's just that's just the fact of what it is. We can't get as much done because they're not paying attention, or I'm explaining it to them and I can't, like, it's not physical. Like, I can't just like point to their finger and be like, move this to the second fret of your ukulele, or like move this to the third piano key. Like, I have to use words to describe what I want them to do. And sometimes like that's hard for kids who aren't really auditory learners. And that don't have that like middleman, like parent, like helping guide them. So like in a sense, like that is very different from like the audio, or not the audio, the video of it. Like you almost need like that middleman kind of to help with, especially with the younger kids. But when in person, you don't need that middleman because you're the teacher's there, so it's, but in the same sense, it is nicer for me doing online classes because I feel like, sometimes I just get really exhausted doing like lesson after lesson after lesson. And by the time I get to that very last kid, I might be like mentally exhausted, and I might not be giving that last kid as much as I could be, if I didn't have like a whole set of people before. But at the same time, I'm very grateful to have all those kids. Like, I don't want that to be like, like I'm very, very grateful to have all the students that I have, and every single one of them, I love them all so much. And I want to do the best that I can for them. But in the same sense, the virtual lessons, they don't wear me out as much as the physical ones do mentally. So that's the good and the downside. But one thing that you were talking about though, Alisha, too, you were talking about like how you like do these really fun and cute activities with your kids. Like, like you play games with them, you you cut and paste, you color draw, like their fine motor skills basically. And it just like reminded me of this one example when I had a kid that I was teaching, and I was given them a couple of papers to, of music. And, I was like, she didn't have a folder. So I took one of my paper clips and I was like, here, use this paper clip. That'll help you. It's like pretty. It's a pretty color. It was like a gold little paper clip.
Oh, nice.
And she looked at it like, what? How do I use this? And I was like, oh, wait. She was older too. So I think that with the kids being online, like some of that more hands-on stuff, like it's more crucial than you might think for them in their development process.
It really is. And like I've noticed it too in the way that they behave in my groups, because sometimes some of the kids that I get tend to have behavioral issues. And so in a larger class setting, when they're one of like 18, it's much easier for them to slip through the cracks and get off task, or start cutting through random things, or drawing, on a notebook when they're supposed to be doing something else. But with me, because I usually only have between 4 and 7 kids in a group, they really get that individual attention. And it's so important for some of them, because I feel like they don't get that in class, especially because the teacher is trying to teach in class and online simultaneously. So for them to get that individual attention, and for me to, because I'm the kind of person that's constantly aware of what they're doing. So if they're off task, I immediately redirect, because I only have them for 40 minutes. So we can't like afford to waste any of that time. And I found that behaviorally, they're really good with me. I have very few problems. Even if I do have to repeat myself a few times, like it's never to the point where I feel like I have to do something that's like more escalated like it would be if I was a classroom teacher. And
Yeah.
the point you made about the fine motor skills is true too. Like they would normally be getting all of that in a traditional classroom environment, and they can't because literally my kids are just on iPads. So they're not really cutting so much like they used to. They're not gluing so much. They're not coloring so much, you know? And they get off task super easily. Just like you said, the young ones, attention spans of a goldfish. You've got them for like 10 seconds, maybe, if you're lucky. And then they've like gone off to something else, and you've got to like pull them back constantly. So,
yeah.
And I mean, again, that's just where we are right now. But I also am with you in feeling like virtual lessons don't drain me as much either. It's so much nicer for me energy wise to just plan out a lesson virtually and then just teach kids who are only virtual, because I think once you get the hang of it, it's still just as effective as a regular lesson, but you have to kind of get the hang of it first. And like, you know?
Yeah, I agree. It especially like once you get, and I think it depends on the kid too. Like if they're older, they know how to communicate in class and how to effectively like click on Zoom and like, you know, have a lesson, then that's everything. But if you have like a younger kid and they don't really understand necessarily that like class time is just virtual now. Like it's still the same, but it's just virtual. Yeah. You know, that's when you kind of get into like some struggles. But I really liked that you brought in like the behavioral kind of issues with the kids and like how that went away when you had those smaller groups. Because I remember you telling me that story one time of when you had a kid and they were great when they were with you, but then when you brought them back to the larger classroom, the classroom teacher came up to you and was like, how was he? He was like, he's always a troublemaker in class, like always causing a ruckus, but he was like an angel with you. Yeah. I bet. And it's because of that, because it was in that smaller group, right?
Yes. And I think that's what made me realize at first, I was really hard on myself because I have a certain standard that I'd like to meet as a teacher. But then this one of my coworkers said that to me about this student. And I was like, oh, maybe I'm not doing so terrible. Maybe I think I'm doing really terrible. And I'm like, really not.
Yeah. And honestly, I think that you're an amazing teacher, Alisha. And I think that with teaching something like, I don't know, this is like, I need a lot of praise. Like I am a words of affirmation person.
Aww.
And when you, when like in the workforce, you don't really get those kind of like, oh, you're doing a good job, or like, you know, what you're doing is really great, or you're really making improvement, yada, yada, you know, you don't get that in certain, professions. And I think that teaching is one of those professions that you'll never really hear that, like you're doing a good job necessarily.
Absolutely. You're totally right about that. Because I know a lot of teachers who work really hard to be really amazing teachers. And I don't think anyone tells them that they're amazing. Like I'll tell them they're amazing because I feel like to get there, you must have gone through a lot. You know, you must have struggled a lot to get to where you are there. But you're right. Like, I think nowadays, even in public and charter schools, like I student taught at a public school and I work in a charter school. Even there's an emphasis on like testing. And so test grades, at least in public school, test grades are a part of your bonus every year, like how your students do on a standardized test. And that's just unfair because it's not like you get to pick your students. You do your best with them and you give them what you can, but I can't guarantee that all my kids are going to pass, you know? Some of them started at maybe they're in third grade. I student taught in third grade and they're reading on a kindergarten level. We're not going to get them to third grade in that year. It's not possible. There's no way because their parents cannot afford a private tutor. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's not my fault. And I think that bears the question of like, whose fault is it then? Not that I'm trying to blame
Yeah.
anyone, but like, I would really like someone to be accountable for these kids because they can be accountable for themselves. They're kids. So,
Yeah.
like you said, having a parent there really helped you with your virtual lessons. I think a lot of my students who really need that support, either in the form of a parent or a tutor or just someone who can like support them in some way, like they really don't get it. And that's why they get
Mm-hmm.
so far behind.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't really think about that before, that's probably, where it is, that kind of support at home, especially for the kids that already struggle. Like I
Mm-hmm.
struggle with dyslexia, and,
Mm-hmm.
I can't even imagine like a kid who struggles with dyslexia and then they don't have a parent reading to them at home,
Yeah.
like how
And
much farther are you going to be down the road from everyone else?
yeah, I think it's really easy to overlook that. But I figured that out when I substituted in a preschool. I realized that a lot of
Mm-hmm.
kids did not speak English natively, and that's because their parents didn't speak English natively. So their parents send them to
Mm-hmm.
preschool with this intent like, I really need you to teach my child English. In addition to everything else she needs to know in life, you need to start with the
Yeah.
English. And so I noticed that the kids who did start in preschool and were used to that classroom environment and did get that like exposure with English did a lot better in the years, like in the coming years. Like it's such an invaluable head start and like
Yeah.
should be required. I don't think preschool is actually required, but it should be required.
I don't think it is. Yeah, that's a really good point. It should be. It absolutely should be. Just because, like you said, it just sets that really good foundation to be set up where, some kids don't even have that foundation to begin with. And you're
Yeah.
already starting on something else, like,
Yeah.
or you're put into a class where you're already supposed to have that foundation and you're
Mm-hmm.
working off of that, but those kids don't have that.
Yeah. It's
And
really
I bet
hard
that's even
for.
heightened. Yeah,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. Well, I was going to say that I bet that's even harder. Like, that's just heightened because of the pandemic now, too.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, I had a lot more kids this year than they ever see in intervention, ever. So that alone told me that
Oh, wow.
just that year end from March to June, and then the shortened beginning from like August to I think October. Like,
Mm-hmm.
even just that took a huge hit on some of these kids. Because, again, like you said, not all of them have parents who are going to stay with them for the entire school day. Most parents can't. They either have to work in home, work out of home. They can't really babysit their 4-year-old all day. And you, as a
Absolutely.
teacher, you mentioned it. It's really hard sometimes to just keep that one student on task. So imagine having your room of physical students and then your like 8 plus virtual students and trying to keep all of them on task. Like it's just, it feels like a lot of the teachers were set up for failure this year in that sense
Yeah.
because there's absolutely no way to do all of that effectively. None, in my opinion.
Yeah. And like, it's hard because you want to like social distance and you want to like make sure that, there's not too many people in school, but at the same time, like we just said, like you're already starting to see the effects of the pandemic, and we're still in the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
like it scares me honestly for like what's going to come down the future for these kids, and it just worries me. But I know the kids are very resilient. Like I have all the hope in the world. I know that they're going to come out fine and they're going to be able to use this to their advantage and they're going to be able to succeed. I have no doubt about that because like I said, resilient.
Yes.
But it's just like it like begs the question of like how are they going to overcome those kind of difficulties that they've already kind of got, those hurdles that have already been set up for them now that schools have been shut down and everything. But along with that, like you said, it's harder for teachers now. And
Yeah.
like you've had your fair share of experiences where the school system is asking way too much of you. Like, didn't you at one point have like 8 groups or something like that you had to teach like in a day or something?
Yeah. So I speak about this job in present tense, although I've left it, so it is technically past tense. But yeah,
Uh-huh.
I had 2 groups per grade level. So K1, 2, so 6 groups plus 5th grade. I ended up getting like 2 months
Uh-huh.
in. So that would have been another 2 groups. So now we're at 8. And then I would have gotten an
Mm-hmm.
additional group for one class because that class just had so many students that needed support. So that would have been 9 groups
Mm-hmm.
of
And
kids.
these are groups of like people, like you go to the classroom and you pull these kids out, and then you have another, like a small group little session of like going over reading and things and like learning how to, just teaching them how to like read, write, and like
Mm-hmm.
learn the language. But some of these kids, I remember you telling me, like were at completely different levels as the others. So it was hard to even
Yeah.
do that too on top of everything else. And then you have to lesson plan on all of that,
Yeah, it
all of those different
was.
groups.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it was. It was getting basically impossible, which is why I was like, I can't continue on this
Yeah.
path, because I already had like no work-life balance to begin with. And then as I got
Mm-hmm.
more and more responsibilities, I was like, I could totally see work just consuming like my life. And I like having a
Yeah.
work-life balance. I really like having the opportunity to like work out and meditate. And these aren't unreasonable things. Everyone should be able to work out if they want to work out. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's what
It's
everyone
just,
deserves, that time to be able to do that.
yeah. And we talked about that self-care time is important. You can't draw
Mm-hmm.
from an empty well. And I feel like a lot of teachers are really, really struggling and drawing from like nothing now because they have nothing to
Mm-hmm.
replenish them. So, like I said, there's no one, you could blame someone or blame multiple people. It won't fix it. We just don't have the resources to fix it right now. There just really needs to be more
Mm-hmm.
resources, but I don't know. Speaking of all of this, though, before you were an English major, you were actually an education major.
I was. Yeah, I was for a real hot minute there. When we first met, I was like in
Yes.
person. Yeah, I was an education major, I think. And so I studied, I got my associate's degree. And from my associate's degree, I transferred to a state college. And that's what, and like I transferred as a education major because
Mm.
I just wanted to teach. I thought that was like where I wanted to be, right? Because I was
Mm-hmm.
good with kids, and I felt like I could be a good teacher. I liked the autonomy that teachers had, and I didn't really
Mm.
know too much about other jobs in the workforce either. Like I was just young and
Okay.
kind of naive too. There was that part to it also, part of the pie. Um, After taking a couple classes, like intro to education and stuff, and I learned so much about the school system and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I I didn't really like the presenting part of it, basically, like the part where
Mm-hmm.
you have to like put on a show almost every time
Yep.
that which we talk about now, because like I found
Yes.
myself in teaching still, and it is kind of like a mask you wear, a
Mm-hmm.
teaching mask in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I just didn't really like the like presenting necessarily part of it. And like, I was also I was like very, 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 very shy. This was the point
Aw.
in my career when, if you listen to our previous podcast, I talk about how like I went through a point where I had like literally no friends. This was
Mm.
during like that point where,
Mm-hmm.
I was like starting to get friends near the end of this kind of era in my life,
Mm-hmm.
because I was starting to meet Alisha like in real life, and then I was starting to meet Alyssa.
Mm-hmm.
But something changed, and I was just like, this isn't it. And it was because I was learning more and more about how the school system really worked, and
Yeah.
I was listening to more stories on teachers and their stories and stuff. Like I
Mm-hmm.
did an interview with one teacher. She taught inner city, the inner city schools, and
Mm-hmm.
she was just like, she would tell me that she just would cry like every day coming
Yes.
home, and I was like, well, this
Mm-hmm.
isn't very delightful now, is it? But
And
I
if
don't want to cry every day.
Right. And if you're not in education, like that is like such a normal statement. I know so many teachers who do that.
Yeah.
Literally.
And nobody talks about that. That was the first time I heard about that. But literally it's like you said, it's such a normal thing. And that's when I kind of like started to drift away from it. And then that's, of course, when Namjoon was posting his book reviews and I started to get more into reading. And then I was like, I could be an English teacher. But then I was like, you know what? I don't want the teacher part necessarily. I just want to go into literature and then find something, you know, more library route, maybe like work in schools as a librarian and then just regular librarian, and then I came out of college and realized that there's no jobs in libraries here in my city. So, but because nobody's retiring like they used to. But you know, what are you gonna do? But you know, that was my journey with education. Is that like I started it, but the education system, the way that it kind of worked, and the way it worked, almost like the way that I saw it, kind of like worked against teachers, kind of like what we talked about with the testing and things like that.
Yeah.
And in some senses it works against the students even too. And so I was just like, I don't feel like I could be a part of that system and give my all to this kind of system and like know that there's nothing I could really do to solidify any kind of change in that system. So that's kind of where I was grappling. Yeah, go ahead.
I echo that same sentiment of not wanting to perform. I think that's what I struggle with the most, because I'm also an introvert, and like I also really don't like, you know, having to get up in front of a room and like present material, which is why small groups worked better for me, because then it was just a few kids. But still, you've still got to get up there and teach them like this, you know, that is the nature of teaching. So in that sense, I understand that part of it and why you would not like necessarily want to go into teaching for that. But also very much so that what you just said, like you're kind of just a cog in the machine. Like you can enact change in your classroom. You cannot enact change in your school district, in the education system. I think it's almost kind of an antiquated profession, because a lot of teachers I know have been teaching for many, many years. And I feel like some of the higher ups in education are also people who've been there for a long time and just kind of feel like they know what's best, but maybe they don't. So
maybe they don't. Yeah.
That's why I like this pandemic, because it's really forced a lot of older teachers to realize you're kind of not with it anymore. Like, you don't know how to work any of this technology, and this is now how you're going to have to teach. So I've seen a lot of older teacher exit teaching for that reason alone, because you have to be so fluent in technology now to like build courses, put together, you know, games and activities and get all the virtual resources together. And it's like, it's so much more complicated than it would have been, you know, if we just had books.
But it's a lot more complicated. And in some ways it's better, because there's a lot of good resources virtually. But, you know, it's like you said, it's being able to adapt to that and be able to like incorporate that into your already established plan.
Right.
That's kind of difficult for some of these older teachers.
And I think some teachers really just don't understand today's students, because I saw a lot of students get teachers who like would do unrealistic things with their online courses and be like, no, you have to do them. And I'm like, sir, we are in the middle of a pandemic. People are dying. So your course is not a priority to anyone. And I feel like some teachers really needed that reminder. Like, you're not the only thing out there. Okay, sit down.
Yeah. Like, especially like my first thought, and it's probably because it's the most vibrant in my mind right now, but college professors.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes some of those professors, like, they think that that was the only English class I was taking when I was taking 4 other English classes in the same semester. It's like, ma'am, I do not have enough time in the day to read all of this.
Right.
And oftentimes I didn't, because I just actually, like, I couldn't read all of it. So Spark Notes, reuse your resources. That's what we're saying here.
You do what you gotta do to pass, okay?
Yeah. As long as you know what the text is about. You can
Right.
skim. It's all right. You get the same idea. But I wanted to ask you, Alicia, like, because we
Mm.
talked about how I switched out of education
Mm-hmm.
into literature, but how did you switch into education? Switch in, like, as in, like, how did
Yeah.
you get into education?
So I really wasn't in education for like a long time. And then I did, like you said, I
Mm-hmm.
switched into it. And it really was first because I really wanted to teach abroad. And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
well, maybe I can do that with my bachelor's. My bachelor's is like a business bachelor. So I was like, well, maybe not. So I actually went and like was like, okay, let's just do the courses because I love school. That was my first mistake. I love school. So
Yeah.
I'm like, if I love school, I must be really good at teaching, right? No. So
Mm-hmm. You are good at teaching, but I know what you mean. You're a good student too. Yeah.
we all try. But that's how I originally got into it. It was like I really want to go travel abroad and like maybe if I'm going to do this, I should do it the right way so that I can get like an actual decent job. And we will go into that in the next podcast. Our next podcast will be
Yes. We'll
all
dive
about
deep into
that.
that.
Yes. But yeah, that's originally how I switched into it. And also because what I was doing before that was like a lot of admin based stuff. And I didn't really enjoy that. So
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to enjoy it, but I didn't. I thought I would enjoy it,
Yeah.
right? Like it's
Yeah.
kind of the same thing where like you get this major and you're like, yeah. And then it's like, no.
Yeah.
When you actually
It's
get to the
almost like,
workforce.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's like you needed that day to like shadow or like to actually do it before jumping into it, but you can't jump into it unless you know it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's that you're like caught in that kind of trap. I know
Yeah.
what you mean.
So that's kind of how I transitioned into education. And lo and behold, it's gotten me where I want to go because now I've got a job offer from a school in Japan and I'll go and do it. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it did serve its purpose. I don't think I will stick in education though. I don't really think it's for me for the same reasons you mentioned earlier. It's just
Yeah.
not a fit.
Because it can be kind of draining when you're on constantly for a really long period of time.
Yeah.
But, you know, and sometimes, you know, you get into education and see this kind of just bleeds out like as a mirror into life just in general. Like, because I know that you, Alicia, you're in education right now, but you're actually looking to get your degree to be a guidance counselor. And then you're
Yes.
also like you have that door open too that maybe you'll get into more like curriculum based,
Mm-hmm.
like creating curriculum, things like that.
Yes. That
So
is.
like once you get go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, once you get like kind of started in a field, even if you don't like it, like what we were talking about, like you don't like admin, you get to, at least once you get there, you know, don't feel hopeless or don't feel like, oh my God, I wasted all these years. Like look
Mm-hmm.
around at other opportunities that you might want to kind of
Mm-hmm.
seek out and craft out for yourself.
That's very true because I think it's a lot easier to transition careers than you think. It's highly unrealistic for you to like graduate in a major and be set with that for the rest of your life. I don't think that's what our generation does. I think that's what previous generations did because they knew if they stuck it out, there was going to be some sort of benefits like pension, 401k. And like, sadly, our generation doesn't have that. So
No, we're not going to get any of that. So why not?
Don't stick it out if you don't want to stick it out. And,
Yeah.
you know, don't feel like you have to stick in a career if you don't want to do it because there are a lot of other options out there and things that you can transition to if you really want to do that. And that's kind of what you did, Lauren, because you have an English major, a degree in English, but that's not actually what any of your jobs are right now.
Oh no. Oh my gosh. The way that I was like able to even have like acquire not one, but 2 jobs during a pandemic
Yes.
is just incredible to me. It's like I was driving today and I was just like thinking like, how in the world do I have, and am I like do I have an occupation right now? Like two
Aw,
occupations, you know,
yes.
that aren't like working at, you know, the fast food place, which nothing against working at a fast food place. Like I have so much respect for you guys, but you know, it's just like crazy because there's not that many jobs, at least in my city too, especially the job market is very saturated. And going off of this kind of pandemic job situation, it's really difficult to, you know, because I talk, you know, I'm close with some of my family members and some of the older members in my family. It's just crazy how like out of touch they are with like the actual job market that there is. I know that Alicia, you've talked about like how your mom thinks that the job market is like very different because of like the time, you know, the time that's passed and stuff too. It's exactly the same for like the older people that I'm around too. And it's like they think I can just go out and just find a nice paying job because I have a degree. And that's not the reality anymore.
No, it really is not.
It's really not. And my grandma called the other day and she was like, Lauren needs to get a job.
Oh.
And I was sitting there at the dinner table and I was like, Grandma, I have like 2 jobs. I work at 2 in music studios and I have, I work, you know, a daytime job too. But my grandma was like, well, it's not a career though. Like you went to college, you should have a career. So it's like that kind of, yeah, it's like that disconnect, I think, with the generations sometimes too, with the pandemic. That's kind of, the pandemic's almost heightening that, which the pandemic is heightening a lot of different things, like what we were talking about with school, the capitalism just in general. And then also generational gaps, I think too, which is like, this highlights that, which is, it was just so different for them.
Yeah.
Back in the day than it is for us now. You know, back then, like boomer generation, like women had a very hard time too getting jobs, from what I've understood from like the social norms and stuff like that and what I've read. But it's still like, even that doesn't really translate to like what's going on now, you know?
And to go off of that, because like you said, there's a lot of disconnect between older generations and our like generation. And I remember one specific memory, because I know I've told you about it, where my mom gave me the same spiel. She's like, you got to like get a degree and you've got to like stick out this job, blah, 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 because that's like, you know, her mentality. And I'm like, Mom, when was the last time you wrote a resume? And it was like silent because she hasn't written a resume in like 30 years. So,
oh wow,
my mom
which is a good thing, but it's also like
exceedingly great thing.
know.
But also, how in touch are you with the job market if you haven't written a resume in 30 years? Because we could tell you how many people apply on Indeed for like jobs, like hundreds, thousands sometimes,
hundreds and thousands
for like
and
one
LinkedIn
job
too.
Yeah,
one position.
So it's like, I feel like a lot of people have just not kept up. A lot of the boomers have not kept up with the change. They've like definitely still see, my dad does it too, they still see that era where they went to school and they worked and think that that's like still what the world does. And the reality is like, now students have like thousands of dollars of loans, can't find a job related to their degree. Like you said, you came out into the pandemic and was like, there's no jobs. Yeah. So
yeah,
these challenges I feel like are relevant and like no one's really addressing them.
Yeah. Nobody's addressing them. Well, I mean, we're addressing them, but we're like the ones who are struggling with it. So it's different.
Right.
But yeah, I know, I agree. It's tough, and it's like it's tough when you know, then this is me going on my usual Lauren BS, but I was reading something the other day and it was talking about how the minimum wage, if it went up with inflation, it would be like $24 right now. If it was made for what it was like, if it was, you know, stayed true to what it was made to be when it was first created.
Wow.
And I was just sitting there thinking like, oh my gosh, like how did we get here to where it's like the federal like minimum wage is actually $7?
Yeah. Right? Or is it
like,
more than that now? I think it might be a little bit more than that now.
Yeah, they're trying to pass something where it's like $10 or $15 for minimum wage federally,
I think
but
Florida passed that too. Well, I live in Florida,
oh
so
yeah, you guys
Florida
did. Yeah.
passed that $15 minimum wage. And I love when people's excuses is always like, oh, but if we pass this, it's going to increase like everything else. And I'm like, well, no, it really doesn't have to. Number one. And number two, don't you think people
I
should
know.
be making like $15 an hour? Like, do you think someone can live on $8.75? Because I don't. I
Yeah.
really don't think that.
Yeah.
So,
And you know, my dad's argument always is like, you're not supposed to live on that. Like that's supposed to be like a temporary job. But then I'm always like, then who is supposed to be working those jobs? Like you want is there enough high schoolers to run a whole McDonald's?
mm-hmm.
You know, and
Technically
I don't
they
know.
can't because high schoolers, if you're under 18, there's so many labor restrictions anyway. So
Yeah, true, very true. And then he's like, well, then you work your way up to be a manager. And I was like, well, do you make enough being a manager to live comfortably?
right?
Like,
I mean,
I don't know.
at least in South Florida, that's like not possible. Like you definitely need a 2-income household if you want to have like an apartment here, because just inflation has like totally blown our housing market like out of proportion to like what the wages are here. So
Yeah. So it just kind of shows, and the pandemic like highlights this too, like the difficulty, like we have really, you and I both have like really nice positions right now and like really exciting things coming up.
Yep.
But it was harder than like what it like appeared to be, I guess.
Yeah.
To like acquire those kind of positions and those careers that we sought after. And a lot of it too, and I was thinking about this the other day, a lot of it too, I think is actually like who you know also sometimes.
Yep. Definitely.
Like one of the positions that I have that's amazing. It's like a family company that I'm working for because it's one of our best friends' families. And the reason why I have that job is because I know her, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're not going to be posting on Indeed. I mean, I don't think they would. So,
right.
Or LinkedIn about their job openings. So, you know, I was telling my dad that I was like, if I would have known that, you know, a lot of the jobs in the job market are just like who you know. Oh, and I'm also the other reason why I was thinking about this thought was I was reading the book Lead from the Outside from
yes.
What is her name? Something Abrams or something like that.
Yes, you've told me about
an amazing
this.
book. Yeah. And I've been listening to that, and she was talking about how she was leading this this like committee, and she was looking around, or maybe it was her business that she was starting, but she was looking around at the table and she realized, one, that they were all of the same ethnicity. They were all white women. And two, that they were all her friends or friends of that, like her friends. You know, they were just hiring people that they knew. And then that's when she realized, like, we need to branch out. We need to be more inclusive. We need to really, you know, open up, be an open door, or be a door that can be opened, I guess is a better way to say that. Like for other people who don't have those connections and who do all the right things, but they just don't have those connections,
yes.
you know? So that got me thinking about it too, like how much it is just like who you know and not so much what you know.
I agree with that too. And I think it's especially noticeable when you go to the very, very high end of the U.S. economy and look at people who are comfortably like millionaires or their families have come from a lot of money. It's very much who you know, and all your families know each other. So you can all keep that wealth within your circles. And it doesn't feel like you're excluding anyone, but you are, because you're not giving people who otherwise, like you said, are qualified, but just wouldn't have that opportunity a chance.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I like what you said there about like, it doesn't feel like you're excluding anyone, because I'm sure it doesn't. Like it probably feels like, you know, I'm helping out a friend. Like I'm doing something good, you know? Like if I started a business, I would hire you, Alisha, because you're my best friend. And so, and I would hire, you know, any of my other like really close friends who needed a position. But at the same time, that's like at the cost of like, well, I'm leaving out someone who's qualified who just doesn't have that connection.
Yeah.
So it's a game of
Very
luck
true.
in a sense.
Look at us going into the heavy hitting topics. We thought this was going to be a light episode, guys. We were trying to keep it very light.
Darn it. Why did we do this? We were doing so good,
we
too.
Were.
And then I got off on my tangent, and that's how... Oh, gosh.
Well, we like to use our platform for good things. So we've created our platform, so we've got to use it.
Yes, we've got to use it. So basically, what you can take out of our conversation here is just like, you're not alone if you're struggling to find a job right now, because we actually put out a small little like questionnaire on our Twitter account. If you want to follow us, our Twitter is PrupleBloomPod or PrupleBloomPro, sorry. But some of the responses in there were actually like no jobs because of COVID. Like I don't have a job because of the conditions here and stuff. So just like, in a way, you can just like, what we want you to take from this conversation is just like, you're not alone.
Yeah.
Like there is opportunities out there. They're difficult and they're hard to find, but they are out there. So that means that you have a chance at getting them, and that like you have everything in you to be able to achieve those positions and those opportunities and whatever you want to, even if it's hard. Now, just be patient with yourself. Be easy. Don't be too hard on yourself. Like things will come up.
And we believe in you. So if, you feel like maybe you're not qualified, I can't tell you how many positions I've applied for that I was not qualified for.
Oh,
do
absolutely.
it anyway. If you need a sign, if you're looking at the position, you're like, no, I don't have that experience, apply for it anyway. You never know. Half the time, you get your foot in the door and they like you. In the interview, they don't care if you're qualified. Truly. It really is a personality test sometimes. So
it is.
Don't be discouraged. I mean, you can be discouraged. Totally. It is totally valid to be discouraged. We're in the middle of a pandemic, but just remember that we believe in you and we think you can be successful, however you define your success.
Yeah. And we're all just faking it till we make it.
Yeah, right?
One of my millennial friends said that, and it literally helps me so much, because it's just like nobody knows what they're doing.
No, we really don't.
We don't know what we're doing. They don't know what you're doing. Your boss surely does not know what the heck they're doing.
Absolutely not.
So don't be so hard on yourself, all right? Just fake it till you make it.
Yes.
It's all Monopoly money.
Oh, yeah. I love.
Okay, well, we will talk to you guys soon. We love you, and we'll see you in the next podcast.
Bye.
Bye.